Have you ever found yourself, completely torn about something?
Like pulled in two directions.
Exactly. Like one bit of you is all in, yes, let's do this. And then another part just slams on the brakes like, whoa, hang on, bad idea.
Yeah, that feeling of inner conflict. It happens all the time, doesn't it? A big decision or even just, yeah, what to eat.
Totally.
Heh.
It feels like there are these different uses inside, all wanting different things. Well, today on the deep dive, we're actually going to unpack that. We're exploring something called internal family systems, or IFS.
Right, IFS. It's this fascinating model that looks at your inner world, kind of like a family with different subpersonalities or parts, as they call them.
And we've dug into some descriptions of it, the main concepts. So something called a parts mapping exercise, these 8 Cs.
Hmm.
Lots to cover.
Uh-huh. And the goal really is to offer you a new way to look at your own inner landscape, understanding these different parts, how they interact. Well, it can shed light on why you feel certain ways or, why you do certain things, hopefully leading to more inner harmony.
Yeah, exactly. We want to boil down the key ideas of IFS, make it clear, maybe even a bit eye-opening, and give you a tool you can actually use to start identifying these voices yourself. So should we dive in? What's the absolute core idea behind IFS?
Okay, so at its heart, IFS sees the mind not as just one single thing, but as a system. Different elements all connected, kind of like a family, actually. It was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz back in the
And
80s.
he was a family therapist, right? So he saw patterns.
Exactly. He started noticing these, well, striking similarities between how families worked, the dynamics, the roles people played, and what his clients were describing about their own internal struggles.
So instead of just one me, it's more like an inner team,
Yeah.
or maybe an ecosystem, with this central self and then all these different parts around it.
That's a great way to put it, an ecosystem. And here's a really key point in IFS. These parts aren't seen as bad or flawed, even the ones that cause trouble.
Really? Even the
Yeah.
really difficult ones.
Yeah, the idea is they all have a positive intention, fundamentally. They're trying to help you cope, to protect you based on what they've learned. The goal isn't to get rid of them. It's more about understanding them, helping them transform, find healthier roles. Like, think about exiles. They're holding on to old needs, maybe wanting comfort they didn't get.
And it's not just theory, is it? It's used in therapy.
Oh, absolutely. It's recognized as an evidence-based psychotherapy. You see it used with individuals, couples, families, and it's flexible, can be for short-term stuff or, longer, deeper work.
Okay. It sounds like a really powerful way to understand ourselves.
It really can be. It helps you tap into those inner resources we all have, like resilience, clarity, compassion, things that are already there.
So this inner family, we've got the self at the center. Who are the other main sort of characters? What kinds of parts does IFS talk about?
Generally, IFS groups them into three main types: managers, exiles, and firefighters. Managers are, well, they're the
Oh.
proactive ones.
Proactive protectors.
Exactly. They try to manage your daily life, keep your emotions in check, plan things out. They're working hard to keep things stable, and importantly, to keep the more vulnerable parts, the exiles, from getting triggered and overwhelming you.
So the part that makes me write lists, or maybe the part that pushes me to be perfect, those could be managers.
They absolutely could, but like anything, they can become extreme. That's when you might see things like intense self-criticism or debilitating perfectionism or maybe constant anxiety. They're just trying too hard to protect.
Okay, that makes sense. Then you mentioned exiles. They sound heavier.
They are. Exiles are the parts that hold the pain, the emotional wounds, difficult memories, maybe trauma, often from early life. They're the young, vulnerable parts.
The managers try to keep them hidden.
Right. Managers and also the firefighters we'll get to work really hard to keep exiles out of our awareness because the feelings they carry, fear, shame, sadness, can be so intense. But deep down, exiles just want to be heard, understood, and healed.
So managers are trying to keep the lid on the exiles. What happens if those painful feelings start bubbling up anyway? That's where firefighters come in.
You got it. Firefighters are the reactive protectors. They jump into action when an exile gets triggered and those big, painful emotions start to surface. Think of them as the emergency crew.
Okay, an emergency crew. What do they do?
Their job is to douse the emotional fire immediately, put out the pain, fast. But their methods are often impulsive, sometimes destructive, frankly. They're not thinking long term.
Can you give some examples? What does a firefighter look like in action?
Sure, it could be things like substance use, maybe lashing out in anger, binge eating, compulsive shopping, shutting down completely. Anything that provides a quick escape or numbness from that exile's pain.
Right, a quick fix, but maybe not a healthy one.
Often, yeah, it's about immediate relief, not consequences.
Okay, so we have managers planning, exiles hurting, firefighters reacting, but you keep mentioning the self. What is that exactly? Is it another part?
Ugh, good question. No, the self isn't considered a part. It's, well, it's the core of who you are, your essence. It's naturally wise, calm, compassionate, confident.
So like the conductor of the orchestra.
That's a perfect analogy. It's the conductor, not just another instrument. It's the resource within you that can lead the system with balance and healing. It's just there, inherently. It's not something you need to build, more something you uncover.
And you mentioned qualities, the 8 C's and 5 P's.
Yes. The self is often described by these qualities. The 8 C's are calm, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. When you're accessing yourself, you tend to feel and act from these places.
Calm, curiosity, clarity.
Mhm.
I can see how this would be helpful.
Definitely. And there are also the 5 P's: presence, patience, perspective, persistence, and playfulness. They just add more flavor to what self-energy feels like. Like when you're in self, you might look at an anxious manager part with curiosity, not annoyance.
So the self is like our inner wise leader, the part that can handle things with grace.
Precisely. It's seen as the agent of healing. Because the self is naturally open and accepting, it allows those protective parts, the managers and firefighters, to relax a bit. They can let the self connect with the exiles safely, hear their stories, and start the healing process.
Wow, okay. This paints a picture of a really dynamic inner world. How do these parts actually, interact? It sounds like it could get pretty messy in there.
Oh, it definitely can. Because each part has its own agenda, its own way of trying to protect you, they can form these complex relationships. Sometimes they clash, they get polarized. One part pulls one way, another pulls the opposite.
Like that feeling of being torn we talked about at the start.
Exactly that. For instance, you might have a manager part that's super critical to try and stop an exile feeling shame, but maybe another manager pushes you to achieve constantly to avoid judgment. Those two managers might be in conflict, even though both think they're helping.
The sources use an example with bulimia. Could you walk through that? It might help make it clearer.
Sure, so imagine someone has an exile part holding deep feelings of inadequacy, maybe from past criticism about their body or worth. A manager part might then try to control this by imposing really strict rules around eating, maybe harsh self-talk about food or weight.
Okay, trying to manage the situation.
Right, but then maybe there's a stressful event or a difficult emotion comes up. That stress triggers the exile's pain, that feeling of not good enough.
And that's when.
That's when a firefighter might jump in. In this example, maybe binge eating. It's a way to quickly numb or distract from that unbearable feeling the exile is bringing up. It just overrides the manager's rules.
Okay, so the firefighter takes over.
Temporarily. But then after the binge, there's often intense shame or guilt. And that can really activate the critical manager again, leading to even harsher rules or self-criticism. And you see the cycle: restriction, trigger, binge, shame, more restriction.
Wow, yeah. That really shows how parts can get locked in these painful loops, even though they're trying to protect. So how does IFS help break these cycles?
The key goal is fostering what's called self-to-part connection. Instead of parts battling each other, the aim is for the self, with all those C's like curiosity and compassion, to connect directly with each part.
So the self talks to the manager or the self talks to the exile.
Exactly. When the self leads, it can understand the part's fears, its burdens, its positive intent without judgment. And from that place of understanding, it can help the part heal, unburden, and maybe find a less extreme, more helpful role.
That sounds like it requires getting to know these parts pretty well. Is there a way for listeners to start doing that themselves? I think I saw something about a parts mapping exercise.
Yes, absolutely. The parts mapping exercise is a great way to begin identifying and sort of communicating with your parts. It uses a framework often called the 6 F's.
Okay, the 6 F's, what are they?
So the first is find. Find the part. Where do you notice it in your body? Is it a tightness, a sensation, or maybe it shows up as a thought, an image, a specific feeling? You just locate it.
Okay, so tune into my body or my thoughts.
Yeah.
Got it. What's next?
Then you focus. Gently bring your attention just to that sensation or thought or feeling. Just stay with it for a moment. See what happens.
Just observe it. Don't try to change it.
Exactly. Then flesh it out. This is where you get curious. What else do you notice about this part? Does it feel big or small, close or far away? Does it seem to have an age? What emotions are connected to it? Maybe even give it a shape or color in your mind.
You're really building a picture of it.
You are. The 4th F is feel. How do you feel towards this part right now? Are you annoyed by it, scared of it, critical, or maybe curious, compassionate? This step is key because it helps you check if you're connecting from yourself. Those C qualities often signal self-energy.
Ah, right. Checking my own reaction to the part. That's interesting. What are the last two?
Fifth is befriend. This is where you start to build a little connection. You can silently ask the part questions like, what do you want me to know? What's your job? How old do you think I am? How old are you? It's about showing genuine interest.
Like starting a conversation inside.
Sort of, yes. And the final F is fears. What is this part afraid would happen if it stopped doing its job? What disaster is it trying to prevent? Understanding its fears often reveals its protective intention.
And you can just ask it that.
Yeah, you can ask internally. And you might jot down notes about what comes up during this whole process. Some people even find it helpful to draw their parts or map out how they seem connected. It's a way to make the inner world more visible.
That sounds really practical.
Yeah.
A tangible way to start exploring. Now, how does this translate if someone works with an IFS therapist? Is the process similar?
It's very similar, yes. The 6 Fs provide a roadmap for the therapy process too, but obviously with the therapist's guidance and support. It starts with find, helping the client identify which part feels most important to connect with right now, what's causing distress.
So identifying the starting point.
Right. Then focus, creating that space for the client to just be aware of the part's presence, the sensations, the feelings, without judgment. The therapist helps hold that space. Then flesh out, guiding the client to learn more about the part, its characteristics, history, beliefs, then feel toward, exploring the client's feelings about the part, gently guiding them towards accessing that self-energy, the curiosity and compassion.
And building that bridge.
Exactly. Befriend is where the therapist facilitates that self-to-part dialogue, helping the client introduce their self to the part, understand its role, listen to what it needs to share. And finally, fear. Exploring the part's underlying fears and the burdens it carries, understanding why it does what it does. This is often where the deep healing and unburdening happen.
It sounds like a very gentle, respectful process. So thinking about IFS overall, what would you say are the main benefits? And are there any, downsides or limitations people should be aware of?
Well, a huge strength is its core belief in that undamaged self. It assumes everyone has this inner resource for healing. That's really empowering. And it gives you this language for understanding yourself that can reduce shame. You're not broken. You have parts that are hurting or trying to protect you. It also really respects the client's inner wisdom. The self is seen as a co-therapist almost.
That focus on inherent health is powerful. What about potential challenges?
Well, a few things. The therapist's own parts can sometimes get in the way, so therapist training and self-awareness are really important. Sometimes a client's protective parts can be very strong, very resistant to change, which can slow things down. It does take a skilled therapist. There's also a small risk, like in any therapy, of becoming a bit too reliant on the therapist if self-leadership isn't fostered. And importantly, IFS isn't usually the first choice for active psychosis or dissociative identity disorder, which need specialized approaches. Also, while the evidence base is growing, more large-scale research is always helpful. And historically, it developed more through a white cultural lens, though there are ongoing efforts now to really broaden its application regarding diversity and inclusion.
That's all really important context. Okay, so as we start to wrap up our deep dive into IFS, what are the absolute must-know takeaways for listeners?
I'd say 1, the idea that your mind is like a family of parts, each with a good reason for being there. 2, you have this core self that's naturally calm, curious, compassionate, and is the key to healing. And 3, that parts mapping exercise is a concrete way you can start to meet your own parts.
And how does knowing all this help with those everyday moments of feeling conflicted or having desires that seem to pull in opposite ways?
Well, it gives you a framework for understanding why you feel pulled. Instead of just feeling messy or frustrated, you can get curious. Okay, which parts are active right now? What's this anxious part trying to protect me from? What does this impulsive part want for me? Recognizing the positive intent, even behind difficult behaviors, lets you approach yourself with more kindness. That in itself can make a huge difference.
That feels like a much more compassionate way to relate to ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, final thought for everyone listening. Maybe think about one time this past week where you felt really conflicted, pulled in different ways. Can you identify maybe 1 or 2 parts that might have been involved? What might each part have been trying to do for you, even if its strategy wasn't perfect? Just noticing. That's the start of this whole fascinating journey into your own internal family.